Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining the Benova June 2021 webinar on subsurface waste containment. As you would have noticed when you when you registered, there was a request there for your AIA number for CEU credit that you would have put in if you had AIA number. So we will have record of that, and we'll enter your attendance with AI. In addition to that, everyone in attendance will get a certificate emailed to you. So before I get my screen up, I just want to show you Benova's version of in-ground waste container that we'll be talking about today. So if you can see my screen, you'll have it here, but this is what the EnviroBin looks like. That's Benova's brand of in-ground waste containment. And the way that it works is this this portion on the bottom here, this round part, is the in-ground portion that goes below grade. So about 6 feet of this container will be in the ground, and then we'll have about 4 feet that's above the ground that you can see as you walk up to this container and approach it. So when you walk up, your garbage will go into this this door here. We call the feed door. So it's about the size of a regular home tote bin type container, like a typical city would bring out to a residential. That's where the trash goes in. And when that container is completely full and it's time to empty it, then the main lid, we call the service door, will open. So when the truck tips it up and it tips the garbage out, that's how that opens. So when it's in a horizontal position, right here under the side internally is a gravity lock. So there's a lock on either side, and you will not be able to open this container when it's in what we call the ground position or the horizontal position. So the point being that you use these smaller doors to put the trash in, so that keeps out large bulky waste like mattresses and tires and couches and chairs and bicycles and those kind of things that we don't want in a standard this type of container. So we'll kind of get into the reasons for that as we get into the webinar a bit. But the way that it works in the ground, we have this portion here we call the ground sleeve. So this goes in the ground, and in the bottom of it, there's some holes around this bottom edge that don't actually, well, you can kind of see them here perhaps, but they don't actually penetrate into the container, because if I can get the light just right, you can see there's a lip here, so it just goes through this lip. The point being, we don't want a hole in the container because we don't want groundwater leaching in, getting into it, and we don't want anything leaching out if it were to, get trash into the ground sleeve. So rebar pins that go in here kind of in a spoke pattern around the bottom, and then we'll pour about a yard of concrete, maybe not even that, maybe 3/4 of a yard of concrete around the base. And the point of that is to keep the sleeve stable, but also to keep it from floating out if we get into a high water table situation, which we do from time to time. So other than that, to continue on this a bit, so we backfill nearly to the top, and then you can see this little lip. That would be the finished grade of the concrete if you were to concrete this. So you got about a 4.5-inch lip at the top that would be above your finished grade, and that keeps water from running into the sleeve and causing it to fill up. So in addition to that, when this container is sitting in the sleeve, it also sits on the top rim and it seals off there. That also keeps water from getting in the sleeve, because the number one question we get with this product is what keeps water out of the sleeve. So just thought I'd show you that, just kind of in a real-time model in the way that works. But I will get my screen up now and we'll get rolling on the main portion of our presentation here. All right, so hopefully this will come out for everyone, and if it's not, maybe someone can put it in the chat and let me know. So again, this is a cutaway version of the EnviroBin. So you can see the ground sleeve here a bit, like we were explaining in the model, and you can kind of tell the inner and outer sleeve and how that looks. You can see there's a bit of a gap at the bottom, so that sleeve is actually completely suspended when that container is sitting on the top rim of that ground sleeve. So a little bit of history on in-ground waste containment. It started in Europe in the mid 80s. So about 1985 thereabouts, some companies kind of got the in-ground waste concept going. I believe it was in Finland at the time, but it's a pretty common thing throughout Europe at this point, especially on the continent. You don't see it so much in the UK, but definitely like Finland, Holland, Netherlands, Sweden, some Germany, France. And one of the companies that got that going in Europe then brought the concept into Canada around 2000. So obviously these things take a while to get going for a person to buy into the concept, but that has become quite a common way of handling waste containment in Canada at this point. We kind of got our start in Canada along with our Canadian counterpart in 2012. So it's about 8 hitting on 9 years now that we've been doing this. And what's different about the EnviroBin is the fact that it's actually handled with the same truck that you handle traditional waste containers with. So the front load garbage truck, as we call it, is how this container is emptied. Whereas in Europe, they use a crane truck. So it's more like an arm that goes out with a crane cable, pulls the bin up out of the ground, swings it over the truck, and it dumps out the bottom. And those are more like it's almost like a canvas bag type of a container, and it sits like in a concrete sleeve. So that, well, it works fine in Europe because it's the kind of trucks they have. When that was introduced into Canada, it was a bit of a challenge at that time because those trucks weren't available to empty those containers. So the companies actually had to do their own service with their own trucks. But we didn't really want to do that. We didn't really want to be a service company in that regard. We wanted to make waste containers and make products for the waste industry. We didn't really want to be a service provider. So that's why we made the EnviroBin to work with the front load truck, because we felt we could scale more quickly in that everybody in North America is running these type of trucks, and it would work much easier. So these are the 5 points that we'll hit on today throughout the presentation, starting with aesthetics. So one of the things that we thought, well, if we're going to kind of reinvent the dumpster, so to speak, there's 2 or 3 things we want to do. One is we want to make it easier to load. Depending on what part of the country you're in, most of the time, a traditional dumpster is going to be like a 6-yard or an 8-yard container. And they're quite tall, but to get them actually all the way filled up, you end up having to throw the trash over the top to get your trash in. And that's not the easiest thing to do always, depending on the weight of the trash bags and so forth. But we thought, well, if we can make this a lower profile and make it, bring our sight lines down, that would be more attractive in a number of ways, but one from the loading aspect. So the loading height of the EnviroBin is right at 48 inches. And in addition to that, we obviously wanted to make it more attractive product, because as everyone knows, just about every municipality in the U.S., assuming the majority of our audience today is in the U.S., we have 39,000 municipalities across the U.S., and just about every one of them has a zoning or ordinance requirement for the screening requirements for dumpsters. And generally that's known as a trash enclosure or dumpster enclosure. But that's mostly because of what it looks like, because it really does very little else um, to address what we call dumpster problems. If it is locked and secure, there is a bit of security there, but generally speaking, it doesn't do much else. We'll be touching on some of those points as we go through. So we wanted it to be more attractive. Incidentally, our company is based in Knoxville, Tennessee, and that's where the dumpster was invented. So if you want to read about it, Google it, you can. The gentleman that invented the dumpster, his name was George Dempster. So that's kind of where the name comes from. And he was quite an inventor in his day, along with inventing the dumpster and the front load truck. He also invented the roll-off container and the truck for that. So quite an inventor back in the 30s and 40s. So to move on a little bit on the aesthetics, and not necessarily just aesthetics, but if we have a container, a product that's nice enough that the municipalities will work with us on the screening requirements to either A, reduce the requirements, or B, eliminate them, then it kind of changes the game on the cost and the footprint and just exactly where we can put these containers. And in this case here, the Starbucks on the slide, if you had a trash enclosure there, it would be twice as tall and the footprint would be bigger. So it can become, especially with a smaller building like this, it can become a distraction to the architecture of the building. Most municipalities will ask that the architecture of the enclosure is compatible, but it still is another big piece sitting there, especially if you have a smaller building that it's sitting beside. So it's kind of competitive in that sense. So as much as we want everyone to look at the product that we manufacture, we realize the best thing is if it's kind of out of sight, out of mind, just doing its job. So before I move on, just going to point out one feature. I'll just blow this up a little bit, but you'll notice these two containers are actually sitting on concrete, because like I showed at the beginning, those the container is actually sitting on the top rim of the ground sleeve, which keeps it from settling down into the mulch or dirt or whatever your material is around that. So from the functionality standpoint of the product, it doesn't actually need to be sitting on concrete. That said, most of the time we do run concrete around them because you want something stable and clean to walk on. But it doesn't have to be a heavy dumpster pad, because we're not slamming the steel container down onto it every time we dump it. So the other thing that does for us, and like this picture here, which is a park setting, is gives you the ability to eliminate a hard surface area, your impervious surface area, and to be able to scale that back and help potentially meet some of your goals in that regard. We'll touch on that in a couple more slides here. We'll move into site plan integration. So like I said, if we can eliminate the enclosure or at least scale it down, not only helps with the cost, but the footprint of it is quite a bit less. So as a bit of an example, kind of real time, you might say, this enclosure, this dumpster enclosure you can see to the right of the environment on this drawing, is about a 14 by 14 enclosure, which is pretty common. Actually, this one's a little bit smaller, but 14 by 14 is pretty common because standard dumpster is 7 feet wide, but they normally load from the side through the side doors. It's not true in every part of the country, not as much on the West Coast, but the rest of the country. the containers typically will load through the side doors. So you've got a 7-foot wide container, and you add, say, 3 feet on either side of it, so you can carry a big garbage bag down through there and load it. You're at 13 feet inside dimension. So a 1414 enclosure is pretty common, which is 192 square feet. But the square feet of the container itself is only about 40 square feet. So it's nearly 5 times the size, not quite 5, but close, of area you're taking up, mostly just to enclose a dumpster because we don't want to look at them. So bring up a couple examples here, or project pictures, I should say. One of the interesting things about in-ground waste containers is that you can easily divide them up and spread them out on a site plan. And it doesn't cost any more to do that because you're only working with the container itself. So when you run standard dumpsters on a site, generally you're going to try to put them all in one enclosure because economically it makes more sense to only build one enclosure. But when you have to have more and spread them out, then it gets very expensive if you're using different enclosures. But with in-ground containers, you can spread them across the site, and you're only, like I said, working with the cost of the container and the footprint of the container. So in this case, there's actually 5 containers in this picture, and 2 that are pretty obvious right here in the front. Third one here in front of this firehouse subs, a 4th one beside the black pickup, and a 5th one's a bit hard to see over behind that gray car on the far right. So the point being, you can use the ends of islands, you can use what's otherwise a dead spot and spread them out. Then, like in this case where you have a mixed-use building with multi-tenant, everybody has more access and easier access to the containers. This particular project on the screen did not have any space behind the building. So it wasn't really an option to do the typical strip mall thing where you have a whole bunch of dumpsters behind the building. They need to be out front. So it was really nice because we were able to spread them out, kind of use up some small spots, and we weren't affecting the traffic sight lines and things like that, which we would have been had it been a large enclosure, trying to sit out in the main parking lot. So worked really well for that. Another example of that with this McDonald's, you can see where this container is sitting on the end of this island, which is a recycle container with the green lid. But again, we got 2 more containers between those 2 cars in the drive-through. So pretty good example of them blending in just with some landscape screening. And didn't mention this before, but when we work with different municipalities, asking them for changes to either make a text amendment change to their code or for a variance, something like that, then we will generally ask them, if we can use landscape screening in lieu of the trash enclosure. And mostly pretty receptive. But this is a bit, an example of that, although this landscaping isn't grown in very well at this point. It's not very mature, but it'll get there. So just kind of on this point, since it's a quick serve restaurant on the screen here, if any of you are working with QSRs at this point, it's quite a big thing to go double drive-through at this point. Some of the Chick-fil-A's, even at least during the pandemic, ran triple drive-throughs. But when you go to double drive-through, all of a sudden that's a whole different ball game as far as your site planning, because you really don't want to buy any bigger property. You want to try to figure out how we can reduce and make use of the properties that have already been sought out. So, but it obviously is going to tighten things up. So to pull down the size of that trash enclosure and reduce that, this is definitely one way to help meet that goal, and potentially make these containers as part of the drive-through elements, as they call them. So I'll just move into a couple of sustainability points. So this product is a very thick rotomolded polyethylene container. So it can be made totally from post-consumer content, and it is 100% recyclable at the end of its life cycle. So that said, it is a sustainable product from that standpoint. The life cycle, touch on that for a minute, is we figure about 15 years for the container itself, with the abuse that it gets, which is actually about 5 years longer than a traditional dumpster. A steel dumpster has about a 10-year life, but in that 10 years, they will replace the bottom of it 3 times. They'll have to weld a new pan on the bottom, which is a very common thing throughout that industry, but that's just a commonly known fact, but within the industry. So this container really doesn't require any maintenance in those 15 years. Obviously, we've just been manufacturing for 8 years, but it does look to be, the line seems to be trending that way. So that said, the ground sleeve is the most difficult part to replace, just because the concrete and the labor that goes into that. So we had some third-party testing done that did some accelerated testing on the ground sleeves, and that came back at about a 40-year product. So we're very happy about that. This I have already touched on, but a bit of a sustainability point, working with your stormwater management and stay on volumes. Anytime we can turn the concrete to grass, we're going to be better off in trying to meet those goals. So like I said, reducing impervious surface areas, just the fact that it's smaller, it's easier to place, but you can also maybe use that as a trade-off for more parking if you are limited in that regard by a particular site plan or requirements of some type of zoning ordinance. Reduced carbon footprint. These are made in North America, so we're not shipping a container full of air halfway around the world. Not a big thing, but something worthy of mention. Increasing the capture rate is probably one of the bigger points as far as sustainability goes. And what we mean by that is when we're handling recycled products, the capture rate basically means if we go pick up 500 pounds of, say, 1,000 pounds of recycled material in a dumpster or this type of container, do we actually get to reuse 1,000 pounds of it? And the answer is no, because there's either contaminants or something, things in there that don't belong, or it's just not usable type material. So the capture rate is a number they look at. But with cardboard and paper, it's a pretty big loss factor, sometimes between 30 and 40%, partly because of contaminants, but a lot of it because it gets wet. And when the cardboard and paper gets too wet, it breaks down the fibers, and they can't handle it properly to actually get it back to a paper pulp, or back to where they can the type of plant that does handle it. So when the truck picks it up, they take it to a processing center and they try to bale it, and it's too wet and too soggy, it actually just goes in another pile, and then they put it on another truck and just take it to the landfill. So it's a pretty big loss factor, especially when you handle it 3 or 4 times and then end up taking it to the landfill anyway. It's kind of a question whether it ever made sense to do it to begin with. So just going to flip back a slide here, but just like I was showing you at the beginning, that main service door lid always stays shut. And if you can still see my camera, and it doesn't matter if you can't, but those small feed doors, which will be the blue ones on the screen right now, they don't open past a 90-degree angle, so they always fall shut. Therefore, that bin does stay dry inside, and which will help protect cardboard and paper, those type of recycles that we don't want getting wet. So that kind of takes us into odor control, consequently pest control in and around waste containers. So like I said, the lids stay shut, which is a pretty big factor in actually keeping the smell, the odor inside the container. But it does a lot more than that. And one is that when we're keeping the rain out, if you ever go looking at dumpsters, they're very often the lids are open. The lids that are there are really lightweight. They don't seal very well if they were closed, but a lot of times they're open or just completely missing, gotten ripped off or whatever. So those containers take on a lot of water, particularly if you're in a part of the country that's like I am in the southeast and we get a lot of heavy thunderstorms all the time. You get a lot of water in these type of containers. So that's one factor that contributes to the odor problem. Secondly is the temperature. Of course, the bacteria's got to be there to grow, which generally comes from food waste, because almost every commercial container will have some degree of food waste in there, whether it's just from the office or, you know, restaurant obviously would have whatever waste comes out in their garbage. The only thing that doesn't typically would be like heavy industrial, you know, warehouse trash, that kind of thing. But generally speaking, there's going to be some food waste, and that kind of gunky, soupy stuff that you get in the bottom of your kitchen trash can is going to be in there, and that's what's that bacteria is feeding on and growing. So when you give it more moisture and you give it warm temperatures, that's exactly what it wants. And the big advantage of in-ground waste, one of the biggest advantages, is that it keeps the whole container cooler and greatly reduces the odor because it's bringing that temperature down to where it doesn't grow nearly as quick. So as a general rule, we're going to be in the low 60s in temperature kind of across the country, generally speaking, in the warmer months. So that keeps that whole process slowed down. So the way that looks, kind of in a chart form, and it's just something we found online, but the this green curve in the middle, this mesophile bacteria, is kind of the bulk of all bacteria. So that's the kind of stuff that's in our food and, you know, that we're, you know, interacting with, because that's kind of the temperature range we live in. The other two are extreme temperature bacteria that can grow down below freezing or up, you know, getting closer to the boiling point. But we don't get near as much of that. The stuff we're trying to cook out of our food and all is going to be in this green curve range. So you can see this is in Celsius, but as you get down on the low end, your refrigerator is going to be somewhere, I'm going to say, between 2 and 5 degrees. And that's why we put food there, so it doesn't spoil. But it really doesn't start spoiling very quickly until you get up into the 60s, and even then it's pretty slow. It's kind of on the minimum range end. So 15 degrees Celsius is 59 Fahrenheit. So that's going to be about where we're at. So this is the reason that the odor is so much less with in-ground containers. Whereas you take the temperature up into, you know, 85, 90, 100, 105 degrees, that's just exactly where it wants to be. And the right, you know, just a bit of moisture there, and that bacteria is going to double every 20 minutes. And some bacteria will double in 4 minutes. But as a general average, you know, 20 to 30 minutes is pretty common. But kind of explains why you take some meat or some chicken wings or whatever, and you put in your garbage can in the back sidewalk in the summertime, and the next day you can't walk past it. And that's what's happening, because it's breaking down so fast. So that in turn, of course, is what brings the rodents, whether it's raccoons or stray cats or dogs or small vermin, bees, wasps, yellow jackets, all those kind of things, bears, whatever that comes out of containers, because that odor's going out, they're getting the message. And most of the time, these type of waste containers have a drain hole in the back. As I said, the lids are generally poor quality. The water's getting in there, it's filtering down through the trash, it's running out the drain hole, it's running to stormwater, or it's going to run out on the dumpster pad. Sometimes there's some municipalities require drains, sanitary drains on the dumpster pads. Ironically, some municipalities prohibit it, and they all have their own reasons for doing so. But that's how all the pests get the message, and that's why they come. So the environment, like I said, the lid's always closed. The rest of the container is totally sealed. There just is no access for pests. Birds too can be another issue, and we find this a lot more along the coastlines. This pictures are actually just north of West Palm Beach, and but you can see that really, if you have even a poor quality lid and the lid is shut, that's a pretty easy way to deter birds. But they're just so often not there that it's just, if there's food there, they're going to come, and we know how it is. And you go to the beach and the seagulls come in and they pick up food, they drop it all over the parking lot and spread it all around. That's the same thing that happens. But like I said, birds are actually fairly easy to control, just if you have a lid that works in just about any degree. So as a company, we deal mostly, we have gone out to the market through the architects and designers, civil engineers and that, but we do work with a number of property management companies, and these are the kind of situations they deal with, especially multifamily housing or apartments, condos, and student housing, those kind of things. But this picture on the left, they got a few dumpsters, but a series of tote bins. Those tote bins can be a real headache for property managers, but not only that, also for municipalities that run their own solid waste departments, because those small bins, they often get overfilled, just like you see here. They get knocked over and kicked over, whatever. They get blown over, trash gets everywhere. But if it's a place that's got multiple people using them, they're not the best, most sanitary thing either, because you walk up to one container and you don't know which ones are full, so you go from one to the next trying to find one that's got room enough for your garbage to go in. You end up handling all these containers. But so anytime that we can consolidate and automate, that can be a big win for us and for the customer ultimately. So I'll just pop into some health, safety, and security points. Like I said, about a 48-inch load height on this container, so very simple to load, very easy. But a few of the issues that we're able to prevent that you find with regular traditional containers, unauthorized use, illegal dumping, dumpster diving, fly tipping, as they call it in some areas, bulk waste, as I mentioned, the mattresses and couches and all those kind of things. What that all those things kind of go hand in hand, and they all kind of run on the other one and make the problems worse. As a bit of an example, somebody puts a mattress in that black container on the right. It's already half full, but the same amount of waste is still coming to that container every day, and this shows up pretty quickly in places like strip malls and that, where people, the public, can kind of slide in there and throw things in, but also and more so with multifamily type buildings, probably because of the turnover. A lot of them have high turnover, and a lot of cheap furniture, particularly with student housing, that kind of thing. And so when they move out, they just throw it away. And but when you fill that black dumpster up half, with a mattress, the same amount of garbage is still coming to that container every day. So you get in an overload situation very quickly, like the picture on the left. And if that's all that happens, then at the end of the month in your invoice from your service provider, there's generally an extra line item for overfill container. And, that's kind of, you might say, the least of your worries. The worst problems are when the driver pulls up to empty that container and notices there's a mattress in there, then they don't dump it. Because that's one of the things they don't generally take. That's not always the case, but most of the time it is. So they don't dump it, or if they know there's tires in there, or the kind of things they don't want in the landfill. And then the driver leaves, the container's hitting the overflow point, but then it doesn't get dumped, so it gets that much more garbage brought to it. And hopefully the driver's called dispatch, who calls the customer, gets their property maintenance person out there. They have to unload a bunch of trash before they can get the mattress out, then load all the old trash back in, and call for another pickup, which is another charge. So the things just keep building on themselves and making problems worse and more expensive. So just about any hauler or any property manager will tell you, if you have those, will tell, especially in multifamily, look, don't put those things in there. Put them to the side. We'll call bulk waste, and they'll pick them up. So that's the kind of things that you will find in dumpsters. Like I said, mattresses are pretty common. Boats, well, probably not so common, but you just never know. So you can say, okay, I get it. The EnviroBin's got the lid, it locks. You can't get those big things in there. But what about the two small doors? Can't people still open and put things in there that they don't want or are not allowed to put in their home trash can? And so they go looking for a place to dump it. Notably, paint cans, those kind of hazardous waste items like that, biohazard stuff, um, dead animals, and just things they don't want in their home, or maybe they just overfill their own, and after Christmas, and they just want somewhere to go put it. So that said, those two small feed doors are lockable. So in this case, if you're the manager of a C-store, you can totally lock out that container. When the truck comes to dump it, the feed doors, of course, are part of the main service lid, so it will still open up. The driver does not have to get out and open those or unlock those containers. They will still open. So I'll come back to trash enclosures in general. A couple of slides here, and one is the risk factor of trash enclosures. And trash enclosures are one of the places that police go looking for people when they're on the run, because they're so easy to hide in. Big tall walls, and generally speaking, other people don't want to be in there. But whether it's somebody hiding in there or somebody that gets taken in there involuntarily, whether it's two people doing some kind of illicit deal, they're usually not well lit and not under camera, and obviously the walls are tall enough to conceal them. So it's kind of a ready-made place for illicit activity, and you could think of hundreds of things. But there are organizations out there like SEPTED that's on the screen, or I think there's another one called Design Out Crime, and they look for all these kind of issues on a site plan, not just with dumpsters, but all over. The parking lot lighting, the foot candles, and sight lines for law enforcement, all these kind of things. But that said, there is a risk factor. But if you have a container, like an in-ground container that's sitting out there that's 6.5 feet square and 4 feet tall, you just can't. It just doesn't lend itself to any of those issues. You can't really hide behind it. You can, but it won't be a very effective hiding spot. So inside the enclosure is all this other stuff going on that doesn't tend to be so healthy. And spreading the pathogens and all that kind of thing is going to happen inside of a trash enclosure, because 90% of them at some point will look like this. Very few companies have the discipline to keep them clean. Some do, but very few. And the way that gets that way, it could be somebody that's illegal dumping and they roll up in their car, their pickup, and they chuck a couple bags over the top, the enclosure, and drive off quick. But generally, it's happening because employees are bringing them out, and to get the trash in the dumpster, they open the side door. It's getting full. The only way to get their trash in is to push other trash from the day before or 2 days before to the back, to be able to fit theirs in, or climb up the side, flip the lids back, start throwing it over the top. But not everybody is willing to do that, and not everybody is physically able to do that either. So they'll say, look, I'm just going to sit here to the side. I think the truck's going to come tomorrow and pick this up. It'll come out tomorrow afternoon to put this in. But whether or not that's the case, if the bag gets left there, that's the window of opportunity for, like I said, pests and any type of animal to come and dig in it, raccoons or whatever, and to come and dig in it to find something, or it could be transient persons or whatever. So all those kind of things add up to a very ugly situation inside of trash enclosures, and it's more likely it's going to look like this than not. And this isn't a particular bad one. I've seen them much worse. So we'll move on to some more pleasant points. One of these being that in-ground waste containers are much quieter when they're dumped, partly because they're not made out of steel and they don't have doors that are clanging and banging. So the material, of course, does not resonate noise sound like a typical container does. But there's a few more factors behind that if you ask a few more of the why questions, and that is that a lot of that noise is becoming because the driver is shaking that container trying to get the trash to break loose and fall out. And like I was saying before, a lot of containers get wet inside. The trash, especially paper, tends to stick to the inside of those steel dumpsters, and it will stick in there, and the driver's shaking just trying to get that to break loose and fall out. If you're in a northern climate, then not only does it stick, but it freezes to the sides of those containers, and the driver again is shaking it just that much more to get that to break loose and fall out. So if you're working with hospitality or residential or anywhere that the noise is going to be a factor, then definitely keep this type product in mind. Because like I said, it's a different material. The material is going to be slicker. It slides out a lot easier, and it's not clanging and banging anyway. If they did shake it, and we don't get the freezing problem most of the time because it's below grade. So just flip through a few project pictures here quickly, and most of these you can find on our website at bonovagroup.com. So I'm going to show you a quick video of a truck dumping this type of container because a lot of people want to see how that works. They also want to know, does the driver have to do anything different than they do with a standard waste container? They do need to lift it out of the ground vertically, lift it straight up vertically, I should say, before they tilt it. On that, it's exactly the same as dumping in the other dumpster that they would hit on the very same run that day. So there's nothing special about the truck. It's the same exact truck and the same process of dumping the container. So I'll play this real quick. This usually plays music on here. I don't think you'll hear it, but I hear it on my end, so I'll be quiet here for a minute. So you can see that's about a 40-second process. We say a minute because not always the containers aren't always in the easiest spot, and sometimes the truck has to make a turn or two to get in. But the reason I point that up is because the one thing the drivers appreciate is not having to get out of the truck and unlock the gates on a trash corral. And that doesn't sound like a big deal. And I've had people say, well, the driver probably needs to get out of the truck once in a while anyhow. But a typical front load driver will hit about 100 containers a day. That's just a standard number across the industry. In a metro area, according to one of the big haulers that we work with, one of the publicly traded ones, have told us that 75% of their stops will have enclosures. So if you say that number is only 50%, that's 50 times a day. The driver has to get out, open those gates, and they're not always easy to open. They're usually not in that great a repair. Open the gates, get back in the truck, pull in, dump the containers, back out, get back out of the truck 50 more times, and lock those gates back up. So it's 100 times in and out of the truck every day for the drivers. So they're getting plenty of exercise. You don't need to worry about that. But the other factor is that if this is a 1-minute stop, to open and shut those gates and deal with that turns that to a 4-minute stop. So in that case, you got an extra 3 minutes on 50 stops is 2.5 hours added to that route. So that, all of a sudden becomes a whole sustainability factor because you got thousands and thousands and thousands of these trucks running across America every day with this extra 2.5 hours added to the route times. So it's a lot of fuel burn and a lot of extra labor costs going into those trash enclosure gates that also require a lot of maintenance. So specifically on the EnviroBin, the size of it, this is a 6.5 cubic yard container. Like I said before, most common larger dumpsters are 6-yard or 8-yard containers. You'll find a few in the Northeast they call tall tins. The West Coast mostly runs 4-yard. So we're kind of in the middle of all that with this container. But what we find is that since the EnviroBin or any type in-ground waste container, since it loads from the top, you're actually standing at the top of the container when you load it. So it's a lot different than standing beside the container and trying to throw trash over the top or stuff it in through the side door and trying to get it full. So in efficiency, you get a lot more efficient use of your container because you can load it right to the top with the in-ground container. And we find that an EnviroBin will take away about the same amount of waste as the average 8-yard container. So from a design perspective, we would generally replace an 8-yard container with a 6.5 in-ground container. So this slide here, municipal advocacy. This is one thing that Benova will do for you on your side is we will research any zoning ordinances or screen requirements in any given town, and we've done obviously quite a few of them at this point to find out what are the current codes, what will they accept this type of container. So we're happy to do that for you. And again, if you go to benovagroup.com, on the resources tab, there's a drop down there for designers, so you can pull off Revit files, AutoCAD, SketchUp, PDFs, and all that right off the website. So you can just drag and drop drawings onto your plans. And from our perspective, that's got to be a lot easier than designing the trash enclosure. Not that that's difficult, but what it does kind of allows you just to drag and drop or plug and play, you might say. And if you're doing a repeat design for a particular company, then obviously you can copy and paste their typical trash enclosure, but you almost always have to adapt it to whatever those local codes are. So, which may specify the thickness of the pad, the size of the structure, but the wall type, whether it's CMU or split face or block or brick or whatever that is, some will require roofs over the top, some trellises over the top, and some with drains in the drain on the dumpster pad, some with hose bibs for wash down. So you got all these different moving parts that you do need to confirm. So much faster when you can kind of plug and play this option, at least in our opinion. But like I said, it's not a difficult thing, but it's the same thing with the contractor, because when the contractor goes to install the typical enclosure, they got to do all those same steps, and they got to dig the footers and put the rebar in, pour the concrete, and wait for that to cure, and then lay the block, wait for that to cure before they can do the brick or paint it or whatever they're going to do, and put the top caps on, set the gate posts, wait for those to cure before they can hang the gates. You got the whole custom gate issue. When that's all done, whatever happens with your drains and all that, you got to do, pour the pad inside. You got to wait for that to cure before you can use it. So, point being, that's about a 3 or 4 week process for a contractor on a project. Whereas with the EnviroBin, the only real part of the install is just putting that sleeve in the ground. Once that sleeve's in and set, which is a 1 day, say a day and a half project at the most. I've been on these projects, so I know. You got a day and a half and you're done, you're out of there. So much faster on the install, which of course makes the whole product, makes it less expensive to install. So just as a quick one on that, the typical masonry enclosure, say a 14-14 enclosure like we were talking about before, is going to be in the high teens, close to 20 grand, but can be much higher than that depending on municipal requirements. That's without drains and without any particular fancy brickwork or anything like that. So they're going to be 20 grand plus, where an EnviroBin installed, complete, done and dusted, as we say, will be about somewhere between $9,000 and $11,000. So about half the cost, just on a one-to-one comparison. So we're coming up on time, but I'm just going to touch on a couple more points here before we close up, and mostly it's just some concept drawings I wanted to show you. So kind of going back to the municipality aspect and what the screen requirements are. Like I said, most of them have screen requirements for waste containers. So we don't exactly get away from that because we're in ground, because there still is an above ground receptacle. Obviously it can't be flushed. I mean, it could be flushed to the ground, but it's not very convenient to walk up to something that, like a manhole cover and open it and put your trash in. So that said, a lot of the municipalities will have their requirements, but they're not always practical for this type. Like some will require an 8-foot high wall, no matter what size the container is. Some want, screen on all 4 sides. Some say, well, if it's behind the building, you don't need gates. And there's all, of course, tons of different things. So that said, not everyone is going to adopt right away. And although they generally are pretty receptive, because they realize that it fixes a lot of other problems. Bonova has a screening kit. So this, what you see on the screen here, is what we call EnviroScreen. You can look at it on the website. This is a simulated stone panel. It's a linear low density polyethylene panel, so it's very realistic, but also very impact resistant. So it will take a rock from a mower. It won't crack like a standard PVC fence would. Very high impact in that regard, and very nice to look at. So we do have the EnviroScreen package to go with this container. So again, this particular one on the slide here, totally installed, everything, that 9 to 11 grand is more like 12 to 14 grand. So still quite a bit of savings. but we don't totally lose our footprint because we don't load from the side, so we can bring that in. So that whole 14-foot wide footprint can come to about 9 by 9. So still quite a bit less, even if we do have to enclose this. So just a couple more examples. You can't see it very well in this picture, but there is a gate in the back panel, so you can come in from the back if you want to. And then we do have a gate package for the front. Like I said, I do everything I can to stay away from gates because they are going to get damaged at some point, but that is just the reality at this point until we this becomes a lot more common concept in the US. But like I said, a lot of municipalities at this point even will accept landscape screening and and are very open to this. So we're happy to do that research and kind of fight that fight for you, as we say. But that is pretty much all I got for you today. And like I said, we will send out certificates to everyone that's in attendance, and we will enter your AI number if it was part of your if you put it in when you registered. Otherwise, feel free to send us a note, and we will get that in. So, do appreciate everyone joining, and look forward to working with you, and be more than happy if you send us an email or any particular project you want us to look into. We'd love to work with you. So again, thank you very much and appreciate you joining today. Thanks for joining the June 2021 webinar.